Just a reminder about the ground rules. This session is being recorded, so please keep that in mind when you ask questions. If you may ask clarifying questions throughout the presentation, and when you do have a clarifying question, either just speak up or use the raise hand function in Zoom in the reactions section. But we'd ask you to hold your deeper, more in-depth questions to the end, when we'll hopefully have plenty of time for discussing. But please join me in welcoming Mike Kofoed, who's presenting this week. Mike is an assistant professor of economics at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in New York. His research focuses on the economics of education, including the effects of financial aid on student and institution decision-making, as well as the influence of peers and mentors on college students. The paper he'll be presenting today will be on a topic that seems extremely timely and near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is like, what is the effect of online instruction on student performance? So, Mike, welcome to the PIER seminar, and thanks for joining us. Looking forward to a great seminar.
No, thank you. So let me just share my screen, which will be the first test of online instruction here. Does that look good, Tom?
Yes.
Okay, we can transition. Good. So thanks, everyone. And thanks again for the kind invitation. It's an honor to present at Harvard and to be with you, and especially the PIER fellows. It's been a blast talking to you this morning. So this class, full disclosure, the West Point and the DoD is a totally Microsoft campus. So we taught with Teams, but I couldn't figure out a good play on words for the title. So it's going to be Zooming with class instead of Teaming with class. But title here is Zooming to Class, Experimental Evidence on College Students' Online Learning During COVID-19. And this is work with three rotating military officers, Lucas Gebhardt, Dallas Gilmore, and Ryan Machido. Lucas and Ryan are proud Harvard grads. And I think both took Josh Goodman's metrics class once upon a time. So it's all kind of a homecoming here. So before I start since I'm a federal employee, I have to have the disclaimer that the views expressed are those of the authors and do not reflect the position of the United States Military Academy, the Department of the Army, or the DoD. So if anything you like in here, they will be happy to take credit for, and anything you dislike in here is all my fault, is what that kind of means. So, but I think this, and it's great because we're presenting online because of the ongoing pandemic, and also presenting in front of folks that are very interested in education research. But just kind of as a backdrop, we're interested in the online pivot during COVID-19 that happened in both higher ed and K through 12. And that happened about spring 2020. And, when I think about it, obviously I was teaching my own classes while my 4 kids that are middle school and elementary school were taking their own classes in the same room with me. So I love this cartoon where the teacher's trying to teach a bunch of kids on Zoom. And I think I've had almost all of these things happen at the Kofoed Elementary online school that I've been assistant principal for that last year, including this is my dad's shoe as show and tell, so, but fall semester, when we returned back that fall, was a patchwork of online, in-person, or hybrid. And there's a lot of questions about, are our students, are our own kids trying to learn anything during or learning anything, or is there any kind of learning loss? And which students bear the burden of that learning loss? And so there's been a lot of literature on COVID effects and the title of this slide says education, but I would say just kind of like experiences in general. So Magnum and NICAP find that schools or colleges with early spring breaks increase COVID spread in the college towns. So if my spring break was before the pandemic and the students caught something and came back, there was more spread in that town. If it was later on in the pandemic, then provosts or presidents would be like, do not return to campus. I don't know if you experienced that yourself. All my students were trapped in Florida and then had to find their way back to their hometowns instead of coming back to West Point. And then Josh and Andrew Baker Hicks has this paper that showed that internet searches for online education help material surged during the pandemic. YouTube became my best friend on how to teach my kids, long division that I hadn't done in forever. And also that they show that there's a lot of inequality that happens. So well-off parents were able to kind of handle this a lot better than not so well-off parents. Barron et al. And J. Pubby showed that K-12 schools closed in March. Child maltreatment went undiscovered. So like schools do a lot of different things that are outside of just teaching your kids. They also provide nutrition. They're able to detect when students are being abused. And then Leslie and Wilson found that domestic violence calls increased during the sheltering in place, which if you hook to like some of Scott Carroll's work would show that when domestic violence happens, that not only affects one child, it affects a lot of that child's peer network. Let's see, and then, so online learning has had a very long and interesting, I don't want to say career, but kind of discussion about what the role online learning will have in higher education. I bring this up only to say that for our cases, pandemic online learning was obviously weird. So when I released this paper into the wild on Twitter, I got to meet, we'll say that kindly, I got to meet a lot of like online education technology specialists that were like, don't lump us in with just putting a webcam in your basement trying to teach students. Totally get that. But it kind of fits into this narrative. So like Clay Christensen and Henry Eyring claims that online instruction had the potential to disrupt higher ed by serving students where brick and mortar higher ed maybe wasn't available or practical. And then there's a number of colleges that are even like Western Governors University that offers online education from across the country, a non-for-profit, Southern New Hampshire, BYU Pathways, trying to connect students that might have fallen off the K-12 to higher ed track, or the for-profit colleges have all offered various forms of online education with various different goals. And it's really difficult to estimate the causal effect of online instruction on learning because of the selection of students into online classes. And I'm going to be honest, we're going to claim that also it's pretty difficult to measure it even in a pandemic. And the reason why is you would think that there could be selection of the type of student who wants to attend an online college or an online class that could be correlated with student success outside the pandemic. And also there could be some unobserved selection or unobserved factors that are packaged into the online learning during the pandemic, like the student loses their job, or the parents can no longer pay the tuition, or there could be food insecurity that could have happened coincidentally with the online pivot. And so all these things would make it hard to isolate a causal effect. And so we're going to kind of claim that West Point, not only because it was the school that I'm employed by and the school that let me do the randomization, there's some attributes to West Point that kind of remove some of these difficulties as well.
Hi, Mike. This is Ashley. Sorry, not to interrupt. You just have such nice slides, and I've never seen this before. It looks like there are some scribbles on your slides, and
I'm not sure what that's from too. If someone accidentally scribbled on there.
Yeah, Jared, I didn't know if there was anything we could do to get rid of them.
I mean, I could try unsharing and sharing again.
Why don't we try that?
Someone's
Okay.
erasing it, it looks like. So
Okay. Oh, beautiful. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to be distracting throughout the presentation.
I'm an advisor for my church's like teenage boys group, and during the lockdown we tried to play like Zoom games, and they would like color over any slide I put up as a joke. So I was like, oh, who invited those guys into this seminar? So I'm used to it. We just keep rolling. So
Great, thanks. Sorry.
All right. So online learning, one benefit for online education at the brick and mortars are cost advantages. So Dave Deming has this paper that shows that colleges could decrease their tuition as they offer online classes. Count and Tarbach do kind of like an industrial organization theory that shows that you could spread out the fixed costs of instructor over many students. And you could also increase the market reach into potential students who come to campus. So will COVID-19 increase college offerings and education experience be the same is, I think, a big question facing higher ed policymakers. It was really interesting that one of my mentors from undergrad just became the president of my undergrad institution. I sent him a copy of this paper early on. He's like, this is awesome because, you know, like the trustees think that online is big. I haven't heard a whole lot of students say that they want more of it after the pandemic. And so trying to weigh that decision-making, I think, is really important for higher ed policy going forward. And again, it's difficult to estimate this causal effect because if we know that maybe it's cheaper to offer online, we're not sure if it gets the same benefit, particularly during the pandemic. So some previous literature on top of this that helps guide us is Eric Bettinger et al. Used data from a large for-profit university, and they use distance from the nearest brick and mortar campus, franchise campus to the student's house, and show that students that live farther away are more likely to pick online, and those students earn lower grades. And David Figlio conducted an experiment where they recruited a subset of students within a large class section, and those students were offered an incentive to participate in an experiment. And of the subset that opted in, they were randomized to whether they could go to the lecture live or watch a video stream. And they found some evidence that like low ability, Hispanic or male students tend to do worse with if they got assigned the video stream. And then Colcott did this more recent paper. They randomized the option outside the pandemic. It was just published coincidentally in 2021, but the option to attend certain online lectures at the University of Geneva. And they found that education inequality increased amongst those who were given the option to show up online. So what are we going to do here? Well, given the institutional attributes of my employer, we were able to do a randomized control trial during the COVID-19 pandemic. And given those unique institutional settings, students didn't get to opt into the experiment like the Figlio paper, because you might worry that students that wanted the reward and were willing to do the experiment could be different than those who didn't. Students did not opt into the experiment nor select whether to take the class during a COVID semester. So at West Point, everyone has to take the Intro to Econ class, and the semester that you take Intro to Econ is randomly assigned to you. You have no control over that. So the students who showed up, there was no ability for them to maybe say econ's hard, so I'm going to opt out and take it when we're back in person or something like that. And also at West Point, all courses are uniform. So if you take Intro to Econ from me, or you take Intro to Econ from, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Kane, then you're going to take the same class, the same textbook and the same learning modules. And so I don't have the ability to adjust my course during the pandemic. And also we taught this uniform course, and we had 12 different instructors teaching the course at the same time. And very, very grateful to them. They agreed to go on this crazy trip with me and agreed to teach both online, half their courses online and half their sections face-to-face, so that we could control for teacher attributes as well. And the online or face-to-face teaching modalities were strictly enforced, which meant that if you got online, you couldn't just transfer to the face-to-face section that you wanted. You had to stay in the sections that you were in, and attendance at the United States Military Academy, as you could guess, was mandatory. And they also took roll, and if you just didn't show up and you didn't turn on your camera and participate, then you got to like clean toilets or walk campus with your rifle and all that kind of stuff. So any West Point's a weird place. So I'm just going to pause just for a sec. If anyone wants to ask any institutional questions, I shouldn't say weird. I should say special, since they send me a paycheck. So, but do you have any institutional questions about the setting?
Mike, this is Eric Taylor. So if I understand correctly, we've got a random sample of cadets randomly assigned to treatments, but some of the prior literature on online courses suggests that it's particularly detrimental to low performing students, low performing. So could you tell us a little bit about how we should think about the distribution of students at West Point?
Yes, and I'm going to show you some pictures that will address your question exactly. So West Point to get into West Point, you have to have a nomination from your congressman or senator. And what that means is that there's going to be a uniform or a representative student body of the United States. And so some congressional districts are much more competitive, like Northern Virginia's congressional district, where the Pentagon is much more competitive than maybe like rural Mississippi's district is. And so while the students are awesome, there is quite the distribution of high performing and low performing. And I also will show you that because we recruit, they say that every cadet is an athlete and they try to field every athletic team. About 30% of my students are NCAA recruited athletes. And so that means there's going to be some variation there. Now, because they're coming from different parts of the country, and I'll explain a little bit more in depth here, we have what's called a SEER store. So it's like cadet exam entrance record, where we normalize or we convert the ACT and SAT high school rank and high school quality into an index. And then that way I can rate your academic ability given all those different attributes.
Mike, one thing, so I think you're being overly humble about the West Point setting, because there are certain things that make West Point a great place to do this beyond just the faculty and students are compliant. But it's that, so all of the students are on campus.
Yep.
And so, you don't have this like confounding, with like, okay, it's not just that I'm at home, but I'm depressed as hell at home, or that everybody's on campus, everybody has, access to the same, resources otherwise. And it's purely like some of the kids got this in person and some of the kids got this online. Like,
yeah, no. So we kind of make that argument. So if Josh is on the call, Josh Goodman, he and Andrew Baker Hicks did a very good Education Next article that was titled like why the pandemic is a bad natural experiment. And because there's all these confounders, as you, Tom, pointed out, like maybe I can't afford a meal plan because I got sent home. And so I have food insecurity, or my parents lost their job and there's a lot of stress going on in the family during this time period. The nice part here is fall 2020, because of the military training requirement, all the students did have to return. And while they are here, you cannot be married at West Point. You can't have dependents while you're at West Point. And everyone's living in the barracks that like Peter saw look like Harry Potter barracks. But also everyone's getting fed like full buffet meal. They're getting paid, right? They know they're going to have a job at the end of the 4 years, which is being in the Army. So a lot of these confounders that you would think would be correlated with the online are kind of stripped away. And so we're only comparing students that are well fed, that are employed, that have tuition paid for. Everything about them is the same within treatment and control that you would be worried about in the unobservables.
So they got two additional hands up, Peter and Zach.
Yeah, like I think this is a really excellent setting for this question, like having visited myself, thanks to invitation. In terms of office hours, do students have the same access, or like if I'm an online student, do I only get online office hours?
No, you have the same access. So if you were in an online section and maybe you wanted to go meet your instructor face-to-face, you could still do that.
Okay, so in some sense, like, should we think about your estimates then as kind of a conservative estimate of the negative effect of online education, given that you have the potential for in-person supplements?
Yep.
Okay.
So it's hard to figure out which direction the bias would go if we try to, move this and try to compare it to students outside of West Point. In many ways, we try to think that maybe this could be a lower bound, like the fact that we found it at West Point with all this academic support and all these kind of attributes mean that it probably is not great outside of West Point.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Zach.
I just wanted to follow up on Tom's points about the context and ask Mike if you could say anything about other things that were happening on campus at the time related to COVID, like what restrictions were the students facing or not facing?
Really good question. So I don't know if there's any like pro basketball, like NBA fans out there. I kind of joked that we were living the NBA bubble, if you remember from that summer where all the NBA went down to Orlando. So like the cadets couldn't leave campus at all. I mean, there's a guard shack around West Point. Only faculty and staff and their families that lived on post could come on West Point. And then there was random testing and everything going on. And there's a giant Army hospital. So if a student did get sick, they have immediate access to medical care.
So were there any restrictions on them within the campus socializing?
They had to wear a mask. They could socialize, but they had to have some like 50% capacity in the mess hall, that kind of stuff. There's already a little bit outside the pandemic, like freshmen can't hang out with seniors. You're not supposed to hang out with people outside your social networks, which we call companies. And those were kind of restrictions were a little bit more tightened during the pandemic.
Sue.
Hello. So I missed the first 10 minutes or so. I was in a meeting, but it seems to me it's pretty safe to say that much like the case with your laptop experiments that went on at the military academies, that what we get out of this is a lower bound relative to what we'd expect to see in other settings.
That's right. That's what we try to argue.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think you need to like elucidate every difference, but just sort of to be able to say it's a lower bound, I think is sufficiently powerful for generalizability.
Cool. That's good. I need you to convince the couple referees then. That would be awesome. So, but I agree with you. Yeah, but maybe what we can do is cite the laptop paper as an example of that as well. And Sue Donarski's New York Times articles on the laptop paper. So, cool. Any other questions about the setting? Awesome. So here's a picture, right? Cadets in their masks at graduation 2020, sitting in their socially distant seats at graduation. So what did we do? Military academies, as Sue alluded to, are great opportunities to study many questions in higher education policy because of the random assignments to cadets well, pretty much everything. So like Carroll, Page, and West famously had their QJE using Air Force data. They examined the effect of professor gender on major choice. Insler, Brady, and Rahman used Navy data, looking at the effects of peers on major choice. I have a paper in JHR that looked at the gender match of mentors on job choice in the Army, whether they wanted to be infantry officers or logisticians or quartermasters. Todd Jones at Mississippi State and I have a paper that looked at the effects of peers and peer pressure on branch choice. And then I have another paper of Todd looking at the effects of peers on first generation college student success, because we randomly assign you to a roommate as well while you're at West Point. And I was able to get about 10 years of this randomized roommate data as well. So we're going to kind of build on that and use this natural variation of random assignment of cadets to class sections to evaluate the effects of online instruction on academic performance. And so West Point's going to randomize class schedules by the day and the hour. And so we kind of have like a high schoolish version of like 1 day, 2 day, 1 day, 2 day, as opposed to Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes. And then you could have anywhere from about 7:30 a.m. block to, I think there's like a 2:30 in the afternoon block. Any one of those blocks are going to be block randomized or conditional randomized. Each principles of economic instructor teaches either 2, 3, or 4 sections of this principles class. And so to control for instructor quality, we had each instructor teach half their sections online and half their sections face-to-face. And we're going to section up the class sections for each hour with both remote and face-to-face. So if I am randomly assigned to the 10:30 a.m. block on day 1, then there's going to be both online and face-to-face sections offered in that hour. And then what my co-authors who are in charge of the course did was they randomly assigned the students within the hour to either the online or the face-to-face. Registrar's office randomly assigned the students into each section, just like they would a normal semester. And so this is how we worked with our IRB board, and we're like, listen, this variation is already happening. Let me just nudge the way that we offer our class sections, and that your variation that would happen at any other time would go ahead and just fill it in for me. And so they bought off on that. Class sections look identical, with the only difference being the teaching modality. Now, the one caveat, the one battle we lost a little bit on, and I'm going to kind of bring it back to later on in the presentation, online sections had 18 students in them, but because of COVID concerns and social distancing, in-person could only have 12. So the in-person classes do have smaller class sizes, and we're going to try to do a little bit of robustness checks to ensure that it's not the class size that's driving the result as opposed to the online that's driving the result. Now, the reason why I want to say conditional randomly assign, I'm going to show you in this next one, is because here's my summary statistics. The first column is my full sample. And then I'm going to show you what the characteristics of online students look like, face-to-face students, and then we're looking for some differences here to make sure that the random assignment happened the way as advertised. Now, one that we're going to worry a little bit about is this NCAA athlete. Now, remember, 30% of my students are on football team or soccer team or women's track. And so they're going to conditionally randomly assign those students to more morning sections because the afternoon they have reserved for practice and workouts. And in the very early morning hours, we had a couple more in-person sections as opposed to online. So you were more likely to maybe get an in-person section, but when I conditioned for the class hour, the random assignment looks balanced within the class hour because you were more likely to be in the morning. And then let me just explain some of these too, because it's a little bit of West Pointism. So NCAA athlete, and then we have prep school. So these are for students that are recruited to come to West Point or apply to West Point, but their grades from high school weren't quite good enough. And so we have what's called the prep school. That is a campus that sits up on the hill. I can neither confirm or deny if a lot of football players attend the prep school, but there is their own football stadium set up in front of it. And think of that as like someone that needs an extra year of community college before they can come to West Point. So I have an indicator whether they were a former prep school grad, prior enlisted. This is a program the Army has called Green to Gold. So if I enlisted out of high school and then I showed that I had some like great potential for leadership or academic ability, you could get recruited to go to West Point, 4 years of West Point, and you come out an officer as opposed to being enlisted. And so we would think that maybe they're a little bit more academically at risk because they've been out of education for 3 to 4 years. And then the SEER score was the index that compares SAT, ACT, high school rank, and high school quality. And so it's out of 800. And so the difference is maybe 1 point between the two modalities on that one. So we feel pretty good, with the exception maybe the NCAA athlete, but the conditional random assignment takes care of that. But we feel pretty good that we look pretty balanced. These class sections look remarkably the same. So then we're going to do a covariate balance check. We're going to regress the attribute that we're thinking about on whether or not they got online. And so if I just do it by itself with no instructor fixed effects, no class day effects, no time of day effects, on here, we look pretty balanced across. SEER score, which is the academic quality, is a pretty strong 0. And then I'm just going to put them all in jointly and look at the F stats here. And you can see that as I add in those fixed effects, the F stats never get larger than 1.
Mike, can you tell us a bit about how grading works at West Point? Is it letter grading? Are there pluses and minuses?
Yeah, really good question. So we go from an F to an A+, right? Where an A+ is a 4.33. There's pluses or minuses just like any other college. What's important for us is we were worried about possibly an instructor maybe feeling bad for their online students, you could think, and then curving the grades or the assignments in a way. And again, I tried to structure the incentives as much as I could to get all the instructors to go along with it. So we used, I think it was like My Econ Lab or Applia, one of these online softwares. And that's what generated all the homeworks, all the exams, and all of the quizzes. And so the instructors had to do 0 grading through the whole semester. All the grading was automated. And that was great because then there was no chance for grade inflation in the treatment or the control.
Yeah. because where I was going with that is, will you show us results on the shift in the distribution of grades? Because like, so I noticed that the difference is like between like 84% and 82%. And I'm wondering if the number of students who get A's or A pluses or A minuses or whatever, like, are the distributions of the letter grades in terms of the GP implications. Could you once you get to the results, if you can talk us through those. So
I'll talk you through those. We kind of like, you know, if you have to leave or you fall asleep at any point in this, like we think it's about the same as a half of a plus minus. Now, this is a big deal for these students because at their senior year, they're going to get ranked from first to last. And that's going to determine things like which job they get in the Army, which posts they get to end up with at first. They get to go to Hawaii or Louisiana, right? Or Germany. And so this is a high stakes environment. So also so that, you know, people don't get upset and Twitter rage me. Ethically, we felt like even though this random assignment would have happened anyways, once we estimated the effects that I'm going to show you, we went back and before final grades gave the students in the online the boost so that their Army careers or their West Point careers wouldn't be harmed at all.
I think what Peter was asking was whether there is anything mechanical about a 12-person class versus an 18-person class that places the cutoff for an A plus versus an A at a different point in the percentile distribution. And therefore, if any of this could be mechanically induced. But I had my own question, which was, you know, you have the class size effect would operate, I would think, through the teacher being more burdened in one type of section than another. But you just said the thing about homework not being something that they had to grade. And I believe everybody taught both online and in person, so that on average, the teachers all had the same number of students. Is that that might be something you want to have in the balance table, you know, which is the teaching load for your instructor. How many students your teacher is responsible for. The table you got in front of us right now, you know, you should be showing the balance tables and the regressions, conditioning on whatever blocks randomization takes place in. So if indeed, you know, the athlete thing is one of the blocks for randomization, then that is not a covariate here. It's basically a block that you need to be conditioning on. And my last thing is a communication thing. If you're going to be putting this out to a broader group, I know you are, people in most of the world interpret prep school differently than what prep school is in this particular context. So prep schools are usually schools like Milton and Phillips Exeter that are feeders to elite institutions. And, you know, what you're kind of saying is that this is almost like a extra support or setting. So I just might want to find a different way to talk about it.
Cool. I mean, we could easily switch that to just say like USMAPS, United States Military Academy Prep School. So,
or community college or something like that.
One other quick thing, Mike, because when you, can you go back one slide, please? When you showed the standardized score and so like the first column 4, like row 1, this 0.23, like I was thinking of like 0.23 standard deviations. I was like, oh my God, like this is really huge. And then when I saw the difference in terms of like the actual like amount of test score points, it was relatively small. And I imagine that you're going to run into like, there are going to be some people who might see this 0.234 and think like this is like way too big, or they might look at this 1.65 and think this is way too small. And so from a sales standpoint, I think really guiding people in terms of like how they should think about this 0.2 and this 1.6 is going to be really important. And some of the motivation behind my question was that like if this 2 percentage points could actually, if it's operating on these margins where it's pushing people over the plus minus threshold, it could be very consequential. If it's not operating at these margins, it could be very inconsequential in terms of like the actual grades too. And so that comes to this point of like salience. And so I think it'll be really crucial of like in terms of how we interpret this 0.25 and this 1.65.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Or Mike, actually, I wonder if you could, just following on Peter's point, like, could you, so I know that you corrected kids' course grade to adjust for this, but suppose you hadn't, like how many points on the class rank would, you know,
oh, sure.
Yeah.
on the.
Yeah.
Did it move you down like 10 spots as opposed to like 1 spot or something
Yeah.
like that? Yeah.
I like that, Tom.
No, that's easy to back out. So thank you. All right. So given the random assignment of cadets, the section, and covariate balance, we're going to assume that the unobservable cadet attributes like ability, motivation, affinity for a certain type of teaching modality are going to be also balanced. And so the econometric model is pretty straightforward. We're going to have a dummy in there for whether you run an online or face-to-face section. And then where YIDT is going to be the education outcome for cadet I assigned to instructor J and class A D time T. And so we're also going to be able to put in the instructor fixed effects because we have the instructors teaching both. And we're going to have the controls for class day and class hour, and then some vector of cadet demographics that you saw there. And so this is our main effect, the negative 0.236 when we run in the regression with none of these things here is going to match what we did in the table. And then as we add the instructor fixed effects, class day, time of day, and some of these exogenous controls, we see a little bit of movement, but it's quite small. And so we feel pretty confident that we're identifying this. Now, I really like both Peter and Sue and Tom's ideas of like, well, how do we quantify this? We're kind of selling this as like half of a plus minus, but as Peter said, if it's the half that doesn't, if I still get a B plus regardless, and maybe it's not as huge, but if it moves me from a B plus to a B, maybe that can have some stronger implications. Why are we? Okay, so here we go. So these are our graded events. I've broken out the graded events here and drawn you a picture. One of the ones that I think is helpful with a little bit of context is this one, this negative 0.211. These are daily homeworks. And the reason why I like this result is because these homeworks were not graded for accuracy. They were only graded for completion. And so what we find here is that if you were in the online class, you are less likely to turn in your daily homeworks on time. We also see kind of a dip on the first midterm, but yet that first midterm and second midterm, there does seem to be a slight upward trend. And this could be learning and getting used to the online environment, but our confidence intervals are overlapping there. So they're not statistically different from each other. Also, these grades here are independent. We standardize them independently, so they're not really supposed to be like weighted average of each other. So what does this mean? I think this gets kind of to Peter's points here. One standard deviation is about 7 percentage points of a grade. So the 0.125 is about a half of a plus minus. The largest results for midterms and these daily homeworks that were graded for completion as opposed to accuracy is where we're seeing some of these dips. And this might give us kind of a feel for why we think the online environment caused a lower grade or lower performance academically. So this is the results by grade distribution. This is a cumulative distribution function. So it's going to show you where the mass sits. So the online sections are our dotted lines. And so since it's on top here, all across the distribution, that means most of our students are finding themselves at a lower grade than the in-person sections are. So you can also see like the very bottom of the distribution, those students tend to fail regardless of modality. And the superstars up here tend to get A pluses regardless of modality. But where we see this effect is kind of this middle quadrant here. So I'm going to go ahead and break it up by the SEER score that we talked about. And what we're going to find here is that overall, there's my overall effect again. If I look at the bottom quartile, you can see that it's a little bit bigger. If I interact it though, you can see that it's still negative, but I only have 550 students, and so it's not underpowered. If I also cut it from below the median, it's a bit bigger than the overall effect. But if I flip it here in column 6, it tends to get a lot smaller and go away. So this means that the online seems to be harming the students on the lower end of the academic ability distribution. Just to kind of push this point a little bit more, we go ahead and do a quantile regression as well. And from the quantile regression, you can see it looks pretty much like what the picture looked like earlier, that the lower bound students tend to fail regardless. And it seems to be this 10 to 25% and 25 to 50% where we see our biggest results.
So Mike, I'm sorry, can you go back to the prior table? So, sorry, yeah, so this table, oh, all right, now I see. I was, so 4 and 6 are independent, right? You're estimating.
That's right.
You're estimating those separately. So we could just literally do a difference in means tests on the negative 0.269 and the negative 0.149. And is that
it's not really statistically significant. I mean, you can see that when I do that here with the interaction,
okay, yeah.
It's positive, meaning that the upper half tend to do a little bit better, but we're also trying to push a sample size of 550 students pretty hard. So,
okay.
So I think what we'd say is the evidence is suggestive right here. So, and then the quantile regression tends to recover the same story that we were finding in the previous slide. So we're going to cut this by demographic a little bit. One concern, and I think Sue's comment about the NCAA athlete we need to work on this table. Yep, Eric.
Just one question about the prior ability, or prior performance. So one hypothesis from the prior papers has been that what's difficult for students who were lower performing students in online courses is something about self-regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder, have you tested for this sort of effect on just did you submit your homework?
Oh, that's good. No, we haven't, but that's a really good one to do. So you're thinking maybe substitute that turning in your homework on time outcome on this regression and seeing that if it's the lower ability students that are driving that result then.
Right, because presumably they knew that all they had to do was turn it in, right?
Yeah, no, it's pretty well communicated to them. No, that's a really good idea. And I think that will kind of feed into some of the qualitative stuff that I'm going to show you at the end.
By the way, if when you run that, if you do find it, Mike, that might be helpful to me in a parenting discussion I'm having.
Yeah, okay. I'll email you the table, Tom, directly. So
do they, in the in-person version, do they literally turn it in class, or this is something they do online? It must be something.
Everything's online. All the assignments are online, which is good because that means that the in-person kids cadets have to turn it in the same way that the online cadets have to turn it in. And I might not have made this clear. On exam day, the students take their exams online in their barracks room, regardless of the treatment, because we didn't want there to be not that cadets would ever cheat at the United States Military Academy, but we wanted to make sure that the opportunity to cheat was the same. Or the opportunity to be honest was the same. Let me spin this since it's public a little bit better. You can Google West Point cheating scandal from this semester, and at least we're balanced on that one. So, but cool. No, that's a really good idea, Eric. I'll take a spin on that and let you know what we find. So, all right. So now we're thinking about a little bit by demographic. We're going to cut it by different slices here. So what we find is that it doesn't seem to be driven by female students, but it seems to be driven by male students, white students instead of black. And that might be because there might be some selection on what type of females want to go to West Point, what type of black students want to go to West Point. NCAA athlete, we just find that there's really no difference between the NCAA athletes or the non-NCAA athletes, which was good because we would be worried that maybe given that conditional block randomization, that it was driving the results. But what we do find that's really interesting is this prior service. So these are students that have been outside of education for 3 or 4 years and coming back from the Army. We find large effects, nearly almost a half of a standard deviation for that crowd. And then for the United States military prep school, not Exeter, we find also a large effect, 0.378 standard deviations. And these, again, are our flags for academic at-risk students.
Yeah.
How about instead of prep school, call it remedial year or something? Like
Okay, yeah, that's actually probably the right way to do it. Again, this is what I think all of us do this with our research. You just live and breathe it for a while, and then you forget how to communicate it to the outside. So,
Hi, Mike. This is Peter here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I think this slide is really fascinating. So you basically find that there's no negative effect of online education on women and on Black cadets, right? And I mean, you could also think that women and Black cadets who are in West Point, like they're selected to begin with, but just in general, like these are people who've had to overcome a ton of obstacles, right? And one of the things that will be very interesting from a generalizability standpoint is if it is the case that, you know, women and Black students are not negatively affected by online education, one implication of this could be that expanding access to higher education could be through online education. That could also provide greater access to diversity too. So I think this table is like a massively important table.
Yeah, and that you know, this is the dash of humility here. Like, that's a tough one, right? Because I'm just not sure if it's the fact, like you said, that like my talented female cadets are extremely talented, right? And they've overcome, like you said, a lot of different things. The same with my Black cadets. So whether or not that counts for, like, you know, but working mom, I mean, or maybe it does.
But no, I didn't mean it as a criticism, right? Like the whole sample is selected, right? Like everybody has to go through this. Like, but there's kind of like just a baseline level of diversity, I think, that women and Black kids have to go through in general.
Right. No, that's true.
Like something that you see, for example, is like for extreme marathoning, like women are much better than men are, right? Yeah. So when
I think that's true for powerlifting, right, Carrie, as well. So,
but is that male effect different from the female effect? Like if we
like statistically different from each other, it's probably borderline given some of those standard errors there.
But in terms of quantiles though, Tom, it's like if you think about this in terms of its quantile regressions, it's almost like you're going from like 50 percentile points. Anyway, so.
Yep.
But I was just thinking, like, if you add and subtract, you know, 2 times 0.189, like, you know, that clearly includes, you know, 0.266.
Yep. Oh, 0.277, if you add and subtract. Well, I mean, not necessarily on the Black one, right? Because we add and subtract 0.67 on the white one.
You do them both, but I was saying, even if the white score were estimated perfectly,
yep,
and the Black score would still be different from it, you know. So like these should be would not be different from it. Sorry, would not be different from it. So like add and subtract, you know, 0.19, 0.38 to the Black score, and you include the white number. So then it would just be even more.
So Tom, but like the thing that's interesting too is like with the Black coefficient, although it's economically small, it's not even negative, right? It's positive. And so like I would love to see this estimated on a larger sample size, because there are some other studies that suggest that Black students have thrived during the pandemic when they've not had to deal with racism.
Yeah, so if it were 0.005 with the standard error of like 0.06, then I'd say yeah. But like,
fair point.
The chances of when you get a large sample, it's going to stay this, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So one question I think a few people have asked during the office hours, which I think is a really good one, is what kind of training went on? Like, did we get any kind of workshopping or any kind of instructor development? And so what kind of happened here was, obviously none of us were very good at online instruction, but during the pandemic, that spring semester, we had to switch and teach half the semester online, and then had the summer to plan for the fall. At West Point, 2/3 of our faculty are these rotating military instructors, of which 3 are my co-authors. And so that means that every year, 1/3 of them rotate back into the big Army, and we get another 1/3 that come in from graduate school. And so they've never taught before. And so we made this decision in a couple weeks out of the semester to do this experiment. And so that gave us half of our faculty that had taught online, at least for 2 months in the spring and had the summer, and half the faculty had never taught before. And so we wanted to see if like this faculty teaching experience drove any of our results. And what we find is that new instructor versus experienced instructor, it looks about the same. And when we interact the two, it seems that we're not really finding a whole lot of play there. Maybe that's because none of us have masters in instructional design when it comes to online. Maybe we decided like that we're experienced like, hey, we only got to do this for like 1 more semester, right? Or another semester. So maybe we didn't invest. But that's kind of how we like to argue. I think a lot of higher ed went, unless you were someone like Jonathan Meir at Texas A&M, that's like, that's what he does all day long, is do really well online classes. So now we're kind of thinking about some robustness checks. One is this class size histogram. So we kind of went back and looked at our class sizes. And one thing that we found is that while the cap was 12, and you can see that a lot of in-person classes were at the cap, there were some classes that they pushed beyond that. Maybe there was an odd number or some leftovers, so they couldn't do exactly 12. And so some classes did push beyond the 12. And then some of the online classes, while we tried to do 18 in each class, had some that were below 18 as well. They were not fully populated. And so that gives us kind of an opportunity to look at kind of these overlapping distributions and think like, is there any difference in the overlapping ones? And if we look at the overlapping distributions, our result actually gets a little bit bigger. And so as we get closer to being similar class sizes, the result doesn't go away, but it actually becomes more pronounced. As we get closer and closer. Was that?
Do you only have one class in the region of overlap? The brown is the overlap?
So, yep. So perfect overlap, we just have that one. So we kind of claim overlap as like 14 to 16 or maybe 14 to 17. So that instead of the 6, we're at least getting like a difference of like 1 or 2 or 3. Because we don't have like a ton perfectly overlapping in that direction.
So you're kind of in some regression discontinuity type of model.
Yeah.
Or you're extrapolating to this boundary.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so we find that at least it's not like the sign is flipping or the result is disappearing as we kind of do that. Now, I mean, I like Sue's idea too, is that all the gradings being automatic. So it's not like the teachers being overburdened by having more and more students either here. The marginal cost is pretty close to 0 for an extra student.
Mike, so like this issue of the class size might be like the biggest, question people will raise about validity. So like digging into it some, like another way to do this would be, and maybe you have it in an earlier table, if you interact online with the class size, like even among your online, there's a lot of variation in the class size. Like, do you find that like, I mean, it's not, well, actually, maybe it is random within block. I don't know, but like, if you just say, what is there any relation, is the treatment effect among the online classes related at all to the class size?
Yeah, sure. No, we did do that estimate. It was pretty close to 0. I don't know, I should have been in this slide, but we did do that and it was close to 0. So, and then also if you kind of dig into the higher ed literature, there is some good papers that talk about class section or class sizes in higher ed, and the gains to having a smaller class aren't quite as big as some of the K through 12 stuff. And so I believe if we do it, I don't think we have that list of papers in here, but it's in the paper itself. We find that if we were to use previous estimates, those estimates could maybe explain about 1/5 to 1/4 of the estimate that we calculate for the online. And it's not like we're moving from like 10 students to 300 lecture hall, right? We're moving from like 12 students to 16 students. So some folks, as we presented this paper, have wanted to see some longish term outcomes. And so full disclosure, we would have loved to have done this experiment like with the math department so that every student has to take intro to calculus. So then we could see if they followed on with STEM or those kind of things. But math had already made the decision to teach all in person. So what we try to do here is first we try to think that would these students have switched into economics as their major? So if they do, I actually can see any cadets major. So we go through and collect who swapped in, who swapped out. Also, if they were an economics major in the spring 2021 semester, they would have taken either math for economists, intermediate macro, intermediate micro, or econometrics. And some take multiple of these classes. And so then we could look at their follow-on grades. The smallest sample of the 550 students here, 24 decided to go into economics and major in economics. So we were super underpowered, but I thought at least running the regressions and taking a look was interesting. And so if I do that, this is what we find. This is all standardized. There seems to be like a 0 on switching into econ, but it's a small negative. And then the math for econ grades, which almost all the new majors take as their first class, we found a large negative result in the math for economics class that they took the next semester. And then I took the average of the follow-on classes if you took like econometrics and math for econ or intermediate micro and math for econ, and we still find a negative result here. Well, none of these are powered up enough to really see that they're significant from 0. They're just interesting and people wanted to see it. So this table I'm super excited about. So oh, sorry, I think I saw a hand, Matthew.
Yeah, this sort of like, I'm just stepping back to this compensating treatment group multiplier that you add. Really interesting. And I wondered if you had seen that in other RCTs. And it kind of relates to this slide because what you're doing is you are compensating for a potentially detrimental career outcome as opposed to just the learning of economics.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about how your team thought about that?
Yeah, we thought about that a little bit, specifically if they like moved on to another class. And so since the vast majority of these students would never take another econ class again, we kind of thought about it through like, I don't know if this is the right way or the wrong way. So I'm interested to see what people think since I'm not trained as an ethicist, right? But we kind of thought about like medical treatments. Like once you decide that the COVID vaccine is safe and effective, they generally offer it to the control group once it's unblinded here. And so we just felt like since we had estimated that the online teaching had harmed some of these students, we felt like giving them back, those final points before their grades were submitted was important for their careers or to make them kind of whole. Now, grades and learning are two very different things, right? We kind of all agree that as educators. But given I can't maybe I could have offered them like tutoring during winter break to get them ready for math for economists. We felt like that was the easiest, given the time constraint, way to try to be fair.
Were there any online classes that were not econ and in your sample?
In my sample here?
Well, they were doing online classes outside of your study, correct?
That's right.
Did they get a boost?
I don't know if they did or not because I can't control their grades. So
right, but I mean, if basically what you're finding is that online mode harms students, then well, anyway.
Yeah. Oh, so you mean the follow-on courses, like the next semester econ guys, or like overall?
No, the same semester. So presumably this is a policy. Online courses was a policy that West Point was pursuing because of COVID. You happen to be testing it.
Yep.
But students were harmed by it, most likely outside of the context of your study.
Yeah.
Students that were taking biology. I don't know what classes you take, but point being that, arbitrarily some students were being harmed. Now, because they were also sorting into their classes, it's hard to figure out which ones were being harmed, which ones weren't. But it seems like a global issue and not just one for your experiment.
Yeah, no, I agree. The other departments, though, because West Point also prides itself on uniformity, would have either given them all online all in person or all hybrid. So then there's not really like this treatment and control part that we're worried about.
Mike, are you able to look at the spillover effects of being randomly assigned to online econ classes on your grades and other classes?
You know, we had thought about this. What I can see, and I could go back to the provost's office and try, maybe this is a second, like an AER Insights paper to like follow along with this, right?
Yeah.
I can go back and recover their class schedules. And I have heard that I should be able to see if they were taught remotely or not, online or not.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really interesting paper.
Or even just like my like non-econ grade, you know, like
Yeah.
did being randomly assigned into this mean did it mess up your non-econ grade too?
Right. Or you could even, one idea that we've kicked around is I can see the number of online that you got, and there's some variation there. So maybe like if I got 4 online classes as opposed to 1, what happens to my like overall GPA for that semester?
Yeah.
But if you're randomly assigning, like they shouldn't they be balanced on that too? Like whether or not in their other classes. So if you just say like, did it have any effect on my grades and other things? Like I became really disaffected because I bombed a few problem sets and, you know.
Yep. Yeah. So then I turned around and didn't do as well in my political science class.
Right. So now you got to add some additional compensation maybe.
Yeah.
I was thinking more from the perspective of there is a certain kind of capital that you accumulate in terms of being able to take online classes. And so if you have been randomly assigned to this online class, do you kind of like invest more in like learning how to be effective in taking the online classes? So more from the production of education, right? And you can think about that as speaking to once you start to scale online education to being not just one class, but being multiple classes, do you see that it scales or does it not scale?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Cool. So finally, this last table I want to show you is one that we're really excited about, because what we did is we gave a survey to the students and we wanted to get some kind of qualitative ideas of how they, you know, they felt during this whole experience. And again, remember, we can put in the instructor fixed effects because we have the balance across the treatment and control. So when we asked them like study time in minutes survey, I'm not sure if this is truth telling or not, but we find that the online was like 2 minutes. That wasn't very statistically significant. But what we did ask them is like, rate your concentration from 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. And what we found with the online concentration in class was a 0.5. And then we did an order probe it just because it's discrete numbers and found a similar result there. And what I find really fascinating with this is we are controlling for the instructor. So it's the same instructor teaching, just it's on a camera on Zoom or a camera or in front of a classroom, and the concentration goes down quite a bit here. Then we asked them, well, how connected do you feel to your instructor? And we found large results here with 5 being very connected, 1 being not connected at all. Does my instructor care about me? Marginally insignificant, but still negative. And then how connected do I feel to my peers that were in that class with me? And we find a big negative shock to feeling like a connection with peers. And I think this kind of goes back into kind of, as Peter had mentioned, like that education production function. Maybe like a relationship with an instructor or a relationship with my peers in my classes is also maybe part of that production function. And when those become detrimental or go down a little bit, maybe that's also correlated with my overall course performance.
Or like, do you have any questions like, were you part of the study group?
Yeah, no, for sure. What we didn't ask that, what would have been cool, you know, ex post as you're like building an experiment during a pandemic, right? Would have been something like, you know, name your best friend in the class and like see if they can come up with how many friends they studied with or something like that, you know.
But I was just thinking the study group thing would hint at a mechanism, like,
sure.
Like.
Yep. We kind of tried to get at that with this like peers, but that would have maybe got it even closer, right? Did you study in the study group? So the slogan around West Point is cooperate and graduate. And so like the peer part is a big deal. So. Cool. So some caveats, we already kind of went over these. West Point's weird, instructional, or I should say special, instructional design. None of us were experts, but in online teaching, but we're kind of claiming that's frankly probably a lot of us in higher education during this time period. And also we're evaluating the pivot of higher education, online education during the pandemic. So how we kind of pitch and frame this paper has been kind of gone back and forth. So we've kind of settled on like how evaluating how this pivot to online happened during the pandemic. And we're kind of taking an agnostic take to like, is all an online education bad? Because maybe some people are very well trained and they could heal this gap and whatnot. But we know, at least for us that have small children, for us that have taught college students or were taught during the pandemic, like we think this is a big deal for public policy makers to think about, especially as we're going into another school year here. And so our conclusion was about 550 students. We randomized over 12 instructors, 36 classrooms, a unique opportunity during the pandemic. We found about a half of a plus minus, lower academic ability. This is a lot greater. We also find that cadets were less able to concentrate, feel connections to peers and instructors. And the results show that learning losses due to the online instruction, particularly in the pandemic, with little opportunity to actually learn how to teach well with online. And so while online instruction might lower costs, just sticking a Zoom cam into a normal brick and mortar kind of type institution is not going to work, at least what we found in our setting here. So that's what I have for you. Thank you for all the comments and all your time that I've spent today visiting Harvard from my basement. I appreciate it. So.
Thanks, Mike. We do have a few minutes for questions for folks. I know I'm violated our instructions multiple times by asking more than just clarifying questions, but oh well.
It was a solid econ seminar. I would have felt bad otherwise, right? So.
Other questions people have?
Tom, there's one in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. So, Mike, could you test the probability of taking another econ class, period, by modality?
Yeah, we kind of approached that with either majoring.
Yeah.
West Point, it's like if the next one has to be these toolbox courses, we have our econ majors or anyone else take the intermediate sequence and econometrics before they can take any of the field courses. Which is fun because you can do RD with your undergrads, so in labor.
Any other questions from folks? So seeing none, I just wanted to make sure we all thank Mike for joining us from his basement. Just a reminder that we'll be reconvening here in, I guess the next seminar is November 16th, when Mike Lovenheim will be presenting on returns to college major choice, mean effects, mean trajectories, and earnings variability. So we've got an unusual number of higher ed papers this semester, but very much enjoyed Mike's presentation today, and looking forward to Mike Lovenheim's in a few weeks.
Anytime I can play warm up for Mike Lovenheim is a good day. So,
okay, well, thanks everybody, and the PIER fellows and Mike and I, and we should